everybody to our career pathways in sports. We have a very diverse panel here today. I'm very excited to be interacting with you and hearing about your experiences in sports. We do have a master's degree in sports performance, but however, we've invited all of our students, both undergraduate and graduate students who may be interested in pathways in sports and working in some aspect of sports. So thank you all for your time and your energy and your sharing of your information with our students. Even though we can't see the students, they are here. And students or attendees, if you have questions, you can post them in the chat room. And Dr. Tyra Mitchell will be monitoring that chat room and can jump in and we'll ask the questions at the end of the session. Hi, Nick. Thanks for coming. So we have four attendees here. And rather than me trying to tell you about their lives and maybe mispronouncing their names, I'll call you out and each one of you introduce yourself and kind of tell us what your current job is, your current job title, and maybe a little bit about your educational experience, like how you got to where you are today and what you're doing today. So I'll just go across the screen as you appear on my screen. Doshia, we'll go with Doshia first.
I figured I would be first somehow. Hi, I'm Doshia Woods. I am currently the head women's basketball coach at the University of Denver. I am a 2020 graduate, I guess, of the Health and Wellness SoPA program. I spent 10 years at Tulane as a recruiting coordinator. I've basically coached my entire adult life. I was pretty fortunate. I graduated in 2001 from Western Illinois, and then I also started my coaching career there. University of Denver is my sixth stop that I've worked at. So Western for 3 years, Mexico State, Oregon State, and University of Missouri, recruiting coordinator both there, all the women's basketball, and then the previous 10 years at Tulane. So I pretty much have been this my entire adult life, and I've been pretty fortunate, so I'm excited to share with you guys.
Thanks very much, Doshia. Monika.
Hi, everyone. My name is Monika Gruszecki. I am currently Director of Compliance at the University of Arizona. Previous to that, I worked at the NCAA National Office, and that was my kind of landing stone after finishing out my law degree at Gonzaga University. So I went into a field of law first, and then realized how my particular personal background as a track and field athlete was somewhat of a calling for me. And so I decided to merge those two industries and go into a regulatory compliance role, which is kind of making sure that we're doing things kosher here at the university level.
Very good.
Which is not an easy job for you guys that are listening. So kudos to you, Monika.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Monika does have this interesting pull into sports because she actually, and we'll get her to talk more about that later, but she actually was a professional athlete also. So came through the roles as an athlete and kind of went through the law part. So we'll get you to talk a little bit about that also. Tim.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tim Allerton. I'm a exercise physiologist by training. My current position is research fellow at Pennington Biomedical Research Center. The way I got to this point is I did a master's in clinical exercise physiology. So I worked with patients that had chronic diseases, and I used exercise as a treatment for those chronic diseases. And then I went on to pursue my PhD in exercise physiology and metabolism, which is how I got to my current role as research fellow, doing research on skeletal muscle and adipose tissue responses to exercise. So I took a slightly different route to get to my position, more involved in the scientific basis for exercise science. So I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And Tim also teaches in our program, both our undergraduate, graduate programs. And and Tim, I'm going to get you to pull out some of, he actually owned his own business and did some of what Nick's doing now. So we'll get to pull some of that out too about exactly what you've done and looking at performance and testing athletes. Thank you. Thanks for being here, Tim. Nick.
My name is Nick Brattain. I'm the owner of Brattain Sports Performance. I'm originally from Indiana, born and raised there. I went to Indiana, studied exercise science and physical therapy. I was also a track athlete. ran the 200 and the 400. I started out my career in Indianapolis working for a hospital organization, Indiana University Health. I ran their sports performance department and oversaw their in-house sports performance, 8 strength conditioning coaches at the high school and collegiate level, as well as their athletic trainers and physical therapists. When I left there in 2014, I joined the New Orleans Pelicans. I was with the Pelicans for the 14-15 and 15-16 seasons. In 2016, I left the team and started Brattain Sports Performance. So we are a sports performance facility that works with middle school, high school, and even collegiate and professional athletes here in the New Orleans area. I'm also the Louisiana State Director for the National High School Strength Conditioning Coach Association. And so one of the roles with that is helping to work with high schools in this area and get them connected with qualified individuals who can lead programs, start programs, just based on the importance of having a true expert in that area and helping to just develop that athleticism with that age group.
Great. Thanks, Nick. And thanks for being here. We're going to grab Nick. Nick's actually going to start teaching our strength and conditioning course also at the undergraduate level. So thanks for being here, Nick. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and feel free to expand on them from your own experiences. The first one, and we'll kind of go in the reverse order, but the first one is kind of talk to us a little bit about how you got to where you are in your career. Like, what do you think were the biggest impacts to get you where you are in career? And what advice would you have for others that wanted to go in a similar direction and kind of wanted to do the same thing you're doing? And we'll kind of go in the reverse order. So Nick, I'll start with you.
Absolutely. So I actually started out down the physical therapy route and thought that that's what I was going to spend my career doing. I loved that avenue and that sector. The problem was I felt myself kind of becoming bored with it, especially in the setting that I was in. I was in an outpatient clinic. And so we saw a lot of low back pain. We saw some hip and knee replacements. We did see some athletes, but it was for a very small piece of time. And so, a lot of the education that I had been through, we had talked about, movement patterns, how people get into these positions, a lot of the mechanism for injury. And so, there was an understanding of that, but I didn't feel like there was enough actual conversation about that and training to work on those things. And so that's really what drew me back to the sports performance realm and wanting to get connected in this. One of the, I run an internship program every semester. And one of the things that I try and really drill with our student interns is they need to spend time in the areas that they want to go into. And so if you want to go into physical therapy, make sure that you spend some time observing, and not just observing in one setting, but in all settings. Truly understand, not just what they do on an exciting day or some of the lesser cases, but what's the most boring day look like? What's the most repetitive thing that they do? And understand, what are the things that they wish they could change? Because again, that's one of the things that ended up driving me out of and away from that. And so really understand the struggles that they have. And so, the other piece is just really making sure that we explore a lot of different avenues, whether it's cardiac rehab, whether it's, sports performance training. There's a lot going on with the sciences now in performance and collecting data and analyzing that data of performance. Most professional organizations now have a sports science individual that is what they're spending a lot of time doing. And so, there are a lot of different positions that you can get into at all of these levels. The other thing that I'm spending a lot of time right now on is the number of schools at the middle school level that are starting to incorporate strength and conditioning. And it doesn't necessarily look like what we think it would, lifting weights, things like that. It's creating proper movement patterns and movement proficiency and helping athletes and young individuals develop these skills that they're going to need to carry throughout their life. And so, when we talk about all of the avenues that are out there, there are a lot that are below the surface that not a lot of individuals spend time seeking out. So the biggest thing that I would say is get out in the professional world, spend 5, 10, 15 hours with a few different professionals in different organizations and ask them, talk to them. If they've been in it for 10, 20, 30 years, they have an idea of what's out there, what they would do differently, and how they would go about that.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And this whole notion of like sports specialization for children, And I know Tim has 2 boys that are involved in this, so he can probably talk a little bit about that. But we have so much sports specialization where kids are getting involved and they're starting soccer and then they want to stick with soccer and not play any other sports. And there are some negative ramifications of that. And so being able to train them and do some strength and conditioning, we didn't think about strength and conditioning with with middle school children, but now we have to think about it with middle school children because they do have this sports specialization injury. So that's great. And two, I want to, students that are listening to this that are interested in doing internships, Nick has an internship program, and Tyra, who's also on this, is our coordinator for our internship. So students that are interested or hear something Nick's talking about, that's an option too. So thanks for that, Tim. Nick. So Tim, tell us again, same question, kind of, what career advice do you have for somebody that would want to follow kind of a similar situation? And you have a really interesting pathway of where you've gotten. So what career advice would you have for students that wanted to do something, that wanted to go in the research route, but follow this pathway that you've taken?
Yeah, I don't know if I would recommend the exact path I've taken. It's kind of been a circuitous route to get to the position I'm in. I would say that I've never regretted following something I was really passionate about, and following your passion is going to get you far. But along the way, kind of alluding to what Nick said, you need to collect experiences. You need to collect mentors that can help guide you in the right direction. I think what is complicated about our field is that maybe sometimes there's not the direct route to becoming whatever you want to become. And that can be frustrating for people, especially people just entering the field. But if you look at it from a different perspective, is that it's kind of a clean slate, and it's like unmolded clay. You can just determine how you want to shape yourself and shape your career. Now, that's going to come with significant challenges along the way. There's going to be struggles to get people to understand the things that maybe aren't readily apparent to you. So I say be prepared to take on the challenges of educating people on what you do, and let your passions guide the direction you want to go. And along the way, you collect the experiences and mentors that help you get to that spot. I know my situation was a little bit different. I was so interested in doing what I wanted to do. There wasn't a job open for somebody that wanted to do exercise testing, prescription, and deal with people from across the life and health span, from people that are very sick to people that are professional athletes. So I just decided that it was time for me to start my own business, and that was its own adventure, and I'm glad I did it. And it really helped push me in a direction where I'm leading a little more contemplative life about research and these more fundamental questions about the scientific role that exercise plays. So yeah, that's my best advice.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And I want to jump in and ask one more to add to it, because very few students start out in an undergraduate program or even a graduate program and say, when I grow up, I want to be a researcher. You just don't see a lot of people going and saying that's what I want to do when I grow up. And so, your comment about it not being a direct route, I think really hits the nail on the head about it's very, and probably all of us didn't, all of you didn't get there through a very direct route. But, and so this whole notion of going into research and getting to be a researcher is not something a lot of our students know about. If a student really wanted to become a researcher, what advice would you give them? Like what would be a more direct route for doing that?
Yeah, the traditional route is really going and working your way up to getting a PhD. And I say that not just to, if you want to be the person that leads the research and leads the ideas, but I actually started off as a research associate, which would be more somebody that participates in the collection of research data and helping carry out studies, which I think is another great fulfilling role, way to be involved in research. I think another distinction I would make is that research is, if you're interested in projects, if you're interested in things with a start and a finish, research might be a good thing for you. And if something that you find yourself very interested in, it's a very dynamic field that has a lot of moving pieces to it. So the best way to kind of get started is to seek out people that are currently doing something that you find interesting, and you'd be surprised how willing they are to take you on as I started off as a volunteer. I gave away a lot of my own time when I first started this. And those are, I think, some of the sacrifices I had to make to get started in the field. So seeking out people that are doing that research, either, it's usually at the university level. So we have lots of students here at Tulane that Tulane is a world-class research institution. So I think there's plenty of people to reach out to.
Good. Okay. Thanks, Tim. All right, Monika. So tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are in your career and what advice you would give others that want to work in compliance at a major institution in sports, because you really came from a very different background than anybody on this panel. So it's really nice to have your, it's the diversity of it. So tell us a little bit about how you got there and the advice you would have.
Man, what a meandering path that was. And I think that anyone listening in on this call will realize that, if you're kind of researching and grasping for information and trying to find out what it is that you should do next, you're not alone. Let's just put it that way. Just when Dr. Dornier says, diverse experience, I myself am first generation university student, like my parents and I came from Poland way back in the 80s. So for me to find this field and enter into compliance, it was through having basically identified some core values, some interests of mine as I went through my own education. I initially was certified to be a teacher, and I had coached, and I was an athlete. So kind of being a student and being a teacher were very natural for me. And then when I got to my level in professional competition, I sort of realized that there's this very delicate balance and relationship between these organizing bodies of sport and how they're governed and the people that make them up, right? So when you look at something like the Olympics, or if you look at the Super Bowl and how that looks for you, the consumer, the viewer on the television, you see a finished product, but you also realize that that's made up of an embodiment of people and how they work together and make this happen. So I knew that placing myself in an industry that I cared about, in this case, it was college athletics, was a way for me to make sure that I was one of the good guys, making sure that I understood that I'm there to represent my coaches, to be there for them, to also be there for that student athlete experience, and kind of protect that space because of what it had given me as a student athlete. So I just took some notes. I really liked what Nick said about, getting your feet wet. And if you're not quite sure how to get there to that next spot, also, like Tim said, volunteer. And the sports industry is very much related to the entertainment industry. And you will end up working many hours that, if you were to divide up your salary by hour, it might not look so incredibly lucrative. And everyone on the panel is laughing because it's true. But don't let that dissuade you, just because it's hard or because it's a lot of work at first, perhaps, if you are volunteering your time or if you are shadowing someone, which I think is the best way to do it, because then you get to find out okay, I really don't like doing this all day long. I can't sit at a desk. This is going to drive me crazy. Or I can't see the same injuries every single day from just, obesity or something like that. Those are things that you want to know about yourself, but don't be dissuaded by the fact that perhaps it's hard or challenging at first, because that may not be, that it will get easier as you become more proficient, and it may be something that you do care deeply about. And in my personal opinion, I think that going with your value system is very important when you're looking to kind of make a career choice and where you want to go. I personally value college athletics because of what it provided for me and that unique opportunity that it had. I was just a nothing kid throwing javelins for fun in high school, and I didn't know where to go next and kind of got swept up in this. And that is what college athletics does for a lot of kids. It gives them a pathway. So kind of just figuring out, maybe journaling or figuring out what it is that is that core value for you, and finding ways to pursue that. That's kind of my quick spiel on that.
Yeah, I like that. And I like that whole notion about doing something that you value, because if you value it, I mean, it is that kind of old saying, but if you love what you're doing, it's not really work. And there, we say that and say it kind of tongue in cheek, because it is always work for some of us. But if you really do value it and you kind of love going to work every day, because it is what you do value, it kind of makes it a little bit easier on those days when it's hard and those days when it's not as much fun. And when your women's basketball team loses the national championships, and because Monica's at University of Arizona, so but
Too soon. Too soon.
yeah. Okay, that was too soon. All right. But that's what I told her before. You finished second in the nation, and people think you didn't win. So, but yeah, thanks for that. I think that whole notion of tying it to values is really, really important, an important message for our students. All right, Doshia, I'm looking forward to hearing this one about your career and what advice you would give others, and your career path, about how you got there. Doshia's, I've had Doshia in class, and so I've heard her talk a lot about her path and getting there. So let's hear from you,
I feel
Doshia.
like, especially compared to the other panelists, I think, I always knew I wouldn't say always, I wanted to be a lawyer first. And then I think about middle school, I really started to focus on trying to be a coach. Once I realized I could do this, play basketball and get school paid for. And so I was fortunate when I went to junior college first in Kansas. And then when I went to Western, I remember on my visit telling the coach that I wanted to be a coach. And so I was the first graduate assistant for about a month. And then we had a coach take a job at an awkward time. And so she's like, do you want to keep taking classes, or do you want to be a full-time assistant? And I'm like, full-time assistant. I was, my whole undergrad, I basically lived on Pell Grant. So the fact that I could have a whole paycheck was super motivating. I knew what I wanted to do. So I was fortunate to get a start so early in my career. This past season, I just finished my 20th year overall. I'm a lot older when I look. People, even now, being in this head coaching role, people think I'm still a player, what position? And I'm like, I tell them that head coach, and they just look past me. I'm like, no, I'm the head coach. It's real life. So I think my path was a little different, but I think a couple of things that stood out is at my official visit when I left junior college, it was to Western Illinois and University of Houston. And, on paper, if you're looking like, why would you pick a smaller school? But it was important for me to be around a mentor. I was going to play for a female head coach, and I knew she was going to create this role for me that was important. And I knew I was going to have an important role on a team. But I think one thing that really helped was I was able to voice that to her. So my advice to you guys who are listening is, if you are a student athlete, to voice that to people around you if you want, whether it's to be a coach or something else, to really voice that so people can kind of help you navigate even in your time as undergrad, whether it's an internship or sometimes that you can kind of create for yourself. Coaching for 10 years at Tulane, we have one kid who's in her third year of or second year residency. And I remember she wrote up a whole kind of internship she wanted to do for our team doctor, Dr. Stewart. And it really kind of helped her get into med school later once she graduated. So let people around you know what your interests are. Let them know that you have a desire to be a coach, that you have a desire to be a trainer, and then job shadow, especially if you're a student athlete. If you're not a student athlete, there's most programs have a manager. Come and volunteer. I know COVID has provided a lot of just pivot opportunities and restrictions, but non-COVID times, there's people always need help. Trust me, they need a rebounder or something, but really just kind of show up and be present and ask lots of questions. I think sometimes we put these boundaries on ourselves and we think, oh, because I didn't play. There's in the national championship, I think on the men's side, two of the four coaches that made it never played college basketball. And they never played college basketball, but here they are in the national championship game at the Final Four, kind of the mecca of what we're doing. And it's just because they were able to surround themselves and voice that to others around them that that's what they're interested in. I think the other thing in terms of the career path is, especially when you're young, is just be willing to be different. Now that we all should be well versed in this Zoom life, is you have a lot of different access to people you wouldn't normally, right? In non-COVID times, it's expensive to go to this conference and listen to these people, but now you have access. So live in a chat box. We have a position open here. It's going to be another third assistant, and the person I'm going to hire literally is because she lived in the chat box this entire time on Zoom and really just made herself stood out and brought a lot of just different things to the table. So now that this is part of our life, jump in the chat box, look on Twitter or different social medias about things that you're interested in, and you get in there and form that network. In terms of the network, I did this early on in my career. You try to meet and network with everybody. It's too much energy. Pick 2 or 3 people that you really want to be able to make a connection with and find something past the obvious to either send them an email about or kind of develop this relationship with and see where that can go. It gets too exhausting if you try to connect with everyone, but trying to really reach out to a couple coaches. I know I did that early on in my career. Like I would just email, like, well, can you mentor me? No, I can't. Okay, well, I'm just going to start following your program and not give you a choice, really. Is kind of how I did, where they started to respond, oh, you had a big win, or I saw you had a tough loss. So I really use social media to your advantage for the career that you want to pursue, especially now that we all have access to each other differently, to stay in a chat box and share information and let people know what your interests are.
Yeah, thanks, Doshia. I think you and Tim hit on a common theme, and that is, getting involved in, spending your time in places that you may not want to spend, and you have to devote a lot of hours to get to the final job that you want to do. I mean, very few people have a straight line from their first job to their last job. Most of us take these little circuitous paths. So, and I really like that message too. And I think that's important to really emphasize to our students is, find ways to get involved, talk to people, go talk. If you want to be an athletic trainer, go talk to the people in athletic training. Don't let them say that they can't do it. So, yeah, and so live in the chat box, Tyra says, which is good. So if y'all have questions for any of our panelists, make sure you put it like Coach Wood says, put it in the chat box, and we'll put them at the end of the panel. So thanks. That's really good. So I want to jump a little bit differently. Sports has really changed. I mean, sports has changed over the last 5 years. So if you think about how sports has changed over the last 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, like before we had ESPN and since things like television, and now even as Doshia talked about, even with social media, and this notion of sports and social media, think about in your own careers and what you're doing now, how what you're doing now, or kind of in the realm of what you're doing now, how that's changed over the last 5 years, and how you think careers will change over the next 5 to 10 years. And thinking about how what you're doing might change, what you're doing, or what people that are doing want to do what you're going to do might change. And we'll skip this around a little bit and go in a different order. So I'll start with Tim, and then we'll go to Monika, then Doshia, and Nick. So Tim, how has what you're doing changed?
Yeah, well, I guess 2 of my comments would be that the concept of science, I don't think has ever been more to the forefront than it has been in the last year. I think the word science has been utilized maybe more than ever in human existence. So that and technology. So I would say these 2 concepts of science and technology, if you kind of combine them together, are going to be more a part of what we're all doing, not less. That's the trajectory. So I think it's probably the days of rolling out a ball and saying I'm going to be a strength coach, or rolling out a dumbbell and saying I'm going to be a strength coach, or rolling out a basketball saying I'm going to be a basketball coach. Those days are just long gone. So now it's really incumbent upon us as professionals to be up to date and up to speed on what is the cutting edge, and that is the thing that has changed the most in the last 5 years, in my opinion, has been the incorporation of these things and the acceleration of use of science and technology, and not always for the best. I will say sometimes in terms of technology, it can kind of muddy the waters a little bit in terms of what coaches are trying to do. But I think in some realms, like my preferred sport is baseball, and that's a sport I always say I failed at the most. This is why I didn't go on to play professionally. That has become a great place to implement things like cameras and metrics and technology. So yeah, I think that's what has changed the most.
Yeah, thanks. Definitely, if you talk about baseball, talk about technology changing a sport. It's changed baseball a lot. Our ability to measure everything that every athlete does. So that's great. Monika, what about in your field? Like how it's changed over the last 5 years and how you see it changing over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I'll speak first to like the compliance end, and then I'll just kind of speak to a little bit of college athletics in the building that, you know, we find ourselves working in general. In compliance, and this really runs with any division of compliance, whether it be athletics, hospital compliance, Title IX compliance. I mean, any time that you have a field that has been regulated or has been delegated to regulate an industry, that's compliance. And with as much data, as like Tim was saying, as much data and hard metrics that we have, it becomes, I think the work appropriate term is risk management, but in the industry, we like to use CYA. But risk management is a big deal, you know, because you have everything in writing and you have metrics of who logged on to meetings, especially now with the Zoom. And so you're there to play this dual role between, you know, protecting and enforcing, protecting your staff, but then also enforcing the rules so that they follow them, which is a fun twist. But that becomes challenging, especially when there's so much data flying every minute of the day, and it can feel sometimes like you're getting pulled over for going a mile over the speed limit. Well, everyone typically goes about a mile over the speed limit. So now how do you ensure that you've created a kind of program where you're getting the job done and not making everyone feel like they have to walk on eggshells? So in that regard, I think emotional intelligence is the big key word of the 2020s. Like that's still a high hitting element. And it's very important that you are relatable in this industry, because you're not going to get very far if you're not. People will ostracize you, and then you'll at the end of the day, it'll be a quiet day, but you won't have gotten the job done. And then kind of shifting more from compliance to just college athletics in general, you know, there's the industry just couldn't be any more different now than it was 10 years ago, with regard to international recruiting, the rights now that student athletes have. You know, like we just passed legislation in Division I last week that said, now if you got recruited and you went to a school for a year and you maybe didn't like it so much there because your roommate listened to metal music at 2 a.m. and you just didn't want to be there anymore, you can jump ship and go to another D1 school and be immediately eligible. That really throws a wrench in the calculation for coaches, because now most conferences are doing away with the interconference transfer rule, which typically was something that kept a student athlete from transferring because they would have to sit out a year. Now they don't. And so it's more like free agency, where coaches spend all this time recruiting a kid. And early on, I mean, Doshia, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure in basketball, it's like freshman year, you basically know who you want to recruit.
Yes.
And yeah, so you work 3.5 years to get that kid to sign a national letter of intent to come to your school, and then they have a bad week and they're gone, you know. And so now coaches have to adapt. And how do you adapt your program so that it's not as volatile as that situation would lead itself to? But you've got a lot of emphasis, and the inertia is heading towards empowering student athletes, giving them more autonomy, letting them do more with their name, image, likeness. I mean, amateurism these days is at risk. But then also contrasting that with like the paternalism that's been going on, and sort of over-regulating college athletics, and then now having to supplement that, put on some training wheels for these kids because they don't know how to, you know, for instance, write their resume or do their first job application. So it's like this duality. And college athletics is very much in a transitional period right now. It's just moving as fast as social media and all the trends are, with how student athletes are thinking, how volatile the recruiting space is now, and just how we empower our student athletes, because their voices cannot be stifled. You know, at the end of the day, like if there's some sort of inequity which should be addressed, they're going to voice their opinions, and it can turn a department upside down overnight.
Yeah, you know what? I just like as you're talking about that, I'm glad you brought it up, because that whole new rule, and I think there are a lot of rules that are on the verge of changing in college athletics and that are going to change how we actually even do college athletics. And of course, from my perspective as a professor that wants our students to get jobs, I think about it in terms of, I wonder how that really is going to change how we even operate as a university, because now college athletics are integrally immersed within a university. They're not separate. We think about them as separate units, but they're just not, and so if they're not, the university and athletics is going to have to work together to provide something for these athletes to make them want to stay. Before, we kind of had them on a string, and now it's going to have to be working together. What can the package be all together, and how can we get students involved in working with athletes to make this a really good place for them to want to stay? They want to stay to play basketball, of course, and they want to play for Doshia, but they want the bigger picture too of, what does Tulane University or Denver University have to offer? So it's interesting to see what's going to happen in college athletics and how it's going to affect universities too.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sitting on the edge of my seat waiting to see what happens with this name and likeness with the Supreme Court and how that's going to play out. So yeah, it's kind of crazy right now. I'm almost tempted to go right to Doshia, but I'm going to make it do with Nick and make it a little break and let Doshia think about that, because I know she has a lot to say about how this is going to change. So Nick, tell us a little bit about what you do and how it's changed over the last 5 years. I mean, you talked a little bit about this when you talked about the need for even middle school students wanting strength and conditioning, but how has what you do changed over the last 5 years? And how do you see it changing over the next 5 to 10 years in terms of jobs that are going to be available in this area?
Sure. So, I hit on it a little bit, but one of the things that, I think we're seeing a little bit of now, but it's going to become even more prominent here in the future, and not even 5 years from now. But we see it on ESPN all the time, and you guys had talked about it with baseball, the level of metrics that are coming out now, and even the level of metrics that you can do in a small facility such as ours. Within our training, we use velocity-based training. So for our athletes, they're tracking the speed of their bar. We're using force plates. We are, you're tracking readiness. Earlier today, I did a consulting call for a gym up in Chicago, and they have a gentleman in their private facility that all he does is data analytics. So he's tracking the speeds that athletes are moving at. He's tracking the weight that they're moving. He's tracking their readiness scores on a daily basis. A lot of Division I universities are moving this direction as well, and they have an individual on staff that is what they are paying attention to, and that individual is reporting directly to the head coach and saying, listen, this person looks good today, this person looks like they're a little bit fatigued, maybe we need to pull back some. And so the amount of data that is becoming available, the issue is becoming there's so much data we don't know what to do with it, and we're not really preparing ourselves, preparing the group. We're not able to quantify it the way that we need to. But there's this sports science position that is going to be available at really all levels. Just because it is so easy to collect this data, even GPS monitoring, the amount of GPS work that's done on athletes at collegiate and professional levels is just incredible. So again, there's data coming out all over the place. The other thing that I feel like social media is doing to our field is, and this isn't necessarily a good thing, we are seeing a lot of results. We're seeing the end product. We're not seeing the process. And so a lot of our young athletes, a lot of our young individuals are watching the fame. They're watching, again, the end product, but they're not seeing what's going on in the middle. They're not seeing that process. And that's one of the things that, I am seeing and struggling with, both in the private sector, but also in the public sector, in the high schools is, we have a number of athletes that they are just, they're so focused on social media and what they're seeing. I'm even dealing with this culture of athletes wanting things to come easy. They think that if you don't naturally have it early on. So I think this opens up an opportunity for more sports psychology work to be done. I think sports psychology is highly underrated, and there needs to be more of this happening at all levels. And finally, the last piece is recovery. I think that we're starting to see a little bit of how important recovery is. But, I know that I see it every year, the metric that LeBron James spends $1.5 million on his body each year, and so-and-so spends whatever amount of money. But you're seeing brick and mortar facilities open that are just based on recovery, cryotherapy, float tanks. You're seeing IV treatments now, the massage therapy guns. So there is so much that's coming out. And again, some of it is so overwhelming that we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to use it. But I think within the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to start seeing positions that they're just dedicated to this. They're dedicated to the readiness and the recovery of our athletes. And so again, sports is one of those things that it's extremely popular. Everybody loves to watch it. Most of us are former athletes. We're paying attention to the athletes that are competing right now. Parents are always wanting to get their kids involved in it. And so it's one of those things. There's sports aren't going anywhere. They're only going to become more popular. And we're only trying to get kids more and more involved. And like you alluded to early on, one of the big things within strength conditioning right now is long-term athletic development. We're fighting for this long-term athletic development model where we're working on the development of the athlete, not necessarily the development of the sport-specific individual. So just the basketball player, just the baseball player, whatever it may be. So again, I think based on this popularity and everything going on with sport, we're going to see a number of positions start opening up. And it always starts at the professional levels and makes its way down, Division I, Division II, down to the high school level. And like I said, we're even starting to move into middle school as well.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. When you talk about the data analytics, that's one of the things that you see more and more. I mean, if you look at even the data analytics that's collected at a women's basketball game, and how that's changed over the last 10 years, the amount of data and the specifics of, where they're taking the shots from and which ones are making, our students are going to have to become very adept at data analytics. I know people in physical education always said we didn't want to take math classes. And I think now every career is going to have to take math classes and data analytics and research methods and all those fun classes that we all loved so much in graduate school. So Doshia, tell us a little bit about where you see that your field has been in the last 5 years and where you see it going in the next 5 to 10 years for somebody that might want to follow in your footsteps and get into coaching.
Well, first to piggyback on what Monika said regarding the transfer portal, it's funny when I got the job here in July, I remember saying kind of my press release that I'm excited to build. Sorry, we have bells here. The chimes literally go like on the half hour, so I apologize. But I remember saying that I wanted to build with high school kids, really to have a chance to develop them both as people and players. And it's funny, then we fast forward, it's on my first class of 4 kids, 2 are high school kids and 2 are transfers. And, I think it's part of, as a rural state right now, just part of the profession, part of recruiting. We talk about recruiting at all 4 levels, high school, junior college, international, and the portal. So I think that part has changed. Probably about 5-10 years ago, I gave a talk at the Final Four called "Once You Get Them, How Do You Keep Them?" in terms of your current team and being able to recruit them. And it's funny because I dug it up and to try to apply it now to the current state of our game. And a lot of it will just be irrelevant. I think what the trend now too is X's and O's are important, but it really is not as important as relationships that you're able to build. Baylor men's basketball won a national championship this past year. And if you are active on Twitter, that their kind of hashtag or mantra all year was culture of joy, and really just trying to, your culture is more important than the X's and O's. So I really would encourage people then what type of, if you're in my role, being a head coach here, what type of leader are you? Is it one that is transactional? Is it transformative? Just what type of leader are you going to be? That part is actually Dr. Mitchell's class that I took. I really, in this role, been able to apply a lot of that because once you get to your desired, whether it's assistant, head coach, the basketball piece or whatever it is already there, right? You're passionate about it, but in terms of how you're going to relate to people, and I told my staff, all we can really do is live year to year in terms of how we treat them on the court, off the court, and being at we're a low major, a little smaller than Tulane, but we're still Division I. But they're just knowing that in the springs they could want to leave. for things that have nothing to do with us. It could be the music at 2 a.m. and just honestly preparing ourselves for that mentally. To the point of the name, image, and likeness and how our game is shifting, then we started with our team about 3 weeks ago, a Life 4.0 series. It's every Thursday morning at 7:15 a.m. and it really just gives us a chance to talk about a lot of different topics, whether it's current events and social justice. But our very first talk was just the value of the scholarship. DU is very similar to Tulane, that it's a smaller private school. It's not cheap to go to. So on surface, you're fortunate as a women's basketball player that all of ours are on full scholarship, so everything is taken care of. But then we add on, if we travel, the gear that they get. And so to total up, and we share this spreadsheet with the team. And eventually we'll get to some of them. I told them, how do you filter that out? Okay, I'm all for athletes getting paid, but then you get taxed. And then like us, if I have more experience than the next person, the seniors get paid more than the freshmen. You know, when you take days off, all of this, like you can't just think of this as give me. Yeah, there's some give and take, but we try to talk about the full picture just for them of the value of what they're really getting. We don't have the same budget at like we did at Tulane, but we went to, gosh, you name it, Bahamas, Cancun, San Francisco, San Diego, Maine, all of these like, you know, free trips, if you will. So we really try to talk about it in full, but I think from a college coach perspective, just talking about the big picture, and the trend is shifting to more relationship-based coaching than it is necessarily X's and O's, just because of the recruiting piece that we talked about earlier.
Great. Thanks, Doshia. Yeah, well, certainly college athletics is going to change a lot over the next 10 years. It'll be fun to watch. Let's do this, Tyra. Let's jump in, and why don't you give some of the questions that have come out? And then if that may generate some more questions, because I want the students to be able to interact with our panelists as much as possible. So I'll turn it over to Tyra.
All right, so our first question is from Vani Wright. If you were to incorporate a health coach into your existing programs, what would that look like?
So I'll let anybody jump in that wants to. Bonnie's really interested in health coaching. She's asked us, and that's the health coaching is a new area. And I say health coaching is kind of like what sports psychology was 20 years ago. And that is, we don't know a lot about it, and anybody can hang their shingle up and call themselves a health coach as long as you have credentials about it. And so, but I think it's getting more and more popular. So how would y'all incorporate health coaching into your own area that you're in right now?
I will quickly say, I will quickly say, just because I don't have that much to say on the topic other than the fact that it strikes fear in the hearts of compliance people, because it's a very noble cause, and it's an essential, like nutrition. It's like a three-legged stool of an athlete's development. You need training, you need rest, you need nutrition, and without one of those elements, you're not going to have a well-rounded athlete. But the nutrition part is tough because of so many body image issues. And that really, especially on the female side, like you think you could have a straight scientific conversation and it can just go 8 ways wrong. It can be a loaded subject matter.
Yeah, that from a compliance perspective, that's absolutely on point. So Nick, you were going to say something too about that?
Well, I was just going to say, health coaching, like many other professions, a lot of it comes down to what your experience has been, where you've been, who you've been with, who your mentors might have been. Obviously, just the certification may not be, or just the degree may not be exactly what everybody's looking for. But I know even within our facility and what we do with our adult population, we're all very aware, and even many of our clients are very aware that just going and training, just going into the gym isn't necessarily going to get you where you're trying to go to. It's not going to help you to achieve those goals that you're looking for. And a lot of times it's really the lifestyle that people are in that we have to kind of address. But I'm also, a proponent for, you have to stay in your lane. And so nutrition is not my lane. I reserve that for the dietitians and the nutritionists. Exercise is what I do. And so, when it comes to health coaching, that's where I rely on those trained individuals to speak into those other aspects of life, and whether they can give them help or at least get them connected to another individual to help guide them along that process. But again, like many of us have talked about, a lot of it comes down to your experience, your mentors, and who's helped guide you toward that position.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that notion of a health coach and whatever their experiences is and their educational background is what they're going to be able to coach about. And so whether that's nutrition or exercise, or sometimes it is the psychology of it too. So did Tim or Dosha have anything to add to that? All right, Tyra, is there another question on there?
Yep, there's one more question that we have, and I'll check the Q&A one more time. Okay, yeah, we just have this one more question from Hannah Richards. In addition to the general career advice that you all have provided, do any of the panel members have general advice on how to succeed as a kinesiology student and or how to get the most out of our experience at Tulane?
I'll start. I'm not sure if Hannah is undergrad or in grad school, but I'm going to be completely honest and transparent. Being in grad school, I was not a fan of the group projects at all. But I think once the program ended, those are some of the relationships that I still have. So that's probably the thing I'll encourage is when you have a chance to be a part of the group project, don't have this preconceived idea about it. I definitely did. And then by the time the program ended, we all were able to kind of help each other kind of get through the program and bounce ideas off of each other. So that's probably the first advice I would give is to, really thrive when it's a group project, whether it's partner or something like that. The other thing is, I remember there was a kinesiology event at one of our games, is to go to some of the social functions that they put together. I know sometimes it may seem inconvenient or something like you don't want to do, but you might find somebody else who has outside interests as well, that you can obviously talk about work or talk about schoolwork and then get through there. So put yourself out there a little bit, but really sign up like you did here for these extra activities, because that's where you meet extra people as well.
Yeah, get involved. I like that advice. Tim, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I could echo those comments. I guess I can only speak to what I think worked for me as a student. I think everybody has their own way of doing it, and my way, and Hannah's a student of mine, is to be as annoying to your professor as possible. And what I really mean by that is just press, like keep asking what should I do about this? What can I do about this? Is there anybody that can help me meet somebody in this field? I'm never annoyed by those questions because I know as a student, you're always like on a razor's edge in terms of which way you feel like you could go. And it's a very unsure and uncertain time for a lot of people. And I can understand that anxiety. I will say that nothing will get done if you don't do anything. So just be proactive and utilize. I think professor or instructor is not just somebody that administers a test or an exam. They can be more than that. And I know for me, that's what my professors and instructors and even the grad students I worked with as an undergraduate were really transformative in how and where I ended up in my life. So put them to work, but maybe not too hard in my case, Hannah.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Tim. That's really good advice, is to get to know your professors, and not just in class and not just if it's an online class, not just through discussions, but get to know your professors and talk to them and send them emails and ask them questions and use those resources that you have. I think that's really, really, really good advice. All right, we have about 5 minutes, so I'm going to ask one last question for the panelists. There are no more questions unless students come up with one. But so, what's one piece of practical advice that you would give someone starting out their career in your area of what you're doing? One practical piece of advice. And we'll start with Monika.
I would say go for aim high, like go for the blue chip internship if you could get one. If you can work at a massive, national firm, if you can work for the NCAA, the NFL, NASCAR, WNBA, what have you, they've got really well structured internships where your colleagues would ultimately know how to use interns, because that's an art in itself. So if you have a shot for that, don't be dissuaded by the fact that, oh, this is a national search and et cetera, because those can be some of the best connection points later on in your career.
Aim high. I like that. That's a great piece of advice. Aim high. Tim.
So in my field, in research in general, if you're getting started out, I would find a very valuable skill that you can learn and become very good at it. So find something that is maybe your thing, identify something that is highly valuable. Whether you're interested in like statistics, everybody always needs somebody to work on their stats. If you're a bench scientist, I do a lot of bench science, somebody that has very good hand skills. So those are, I think, concrete skills. Identify something that you can get really good at, one particular skill right off the bat.
What do you mean by bench science, just so that they understand?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Most people in fitness and health don't think of lab science like working with cells and working with preclinical models of like animal models of disease and things like that. That's what we call bench science, where we think about your classic image of a scientist with a pipette and a microscope. That's bench science. But I will say that my science is translational research science. So I take things from the bench to the bedside. So that's the objective. And research applies to everything between the bench to the actual bedside. So whether it's stats or whether it's working a microscope or whether it's writing is an amazing skill to have. And I think it's probably my number one skill at the moment. So yeah, I just find that thing, find something and get really good at it.
Great advice, Tim. Thanks for that. Nick?
So, the first thing that I would say, and this is kind of advice that I would give myself, when you come out and you're passionate about something, you want to be the best at it, and you're in a hurry to kind of make a name for yourself and to leave an impression. The first thing that I would have told myself is be patient and take your time. I tried to do too much too fast, and didn't allow some of those natural processes to occur. The other thing that I would say is try everything. So as Tim was alluding to, you find something. For us, you find your niche. My niche is speed. I ran track in college. That's what I've studied over the last decade. I spent a lot of time when it comes to speed training. But if you don't know what that is, sometimes you need to try a little bit of everything. When it comes to your continuing education and coursework, you need to try a little bit of everything. When it comes to the research, look in a couple of different places and understand what all is out there and what all is available. Look at different positions. Don't pigeonhole yourself in one spot or another. But take your time, be patient, and try everything early on before you try to niche down and really understand what you're getting yourself into.
Great advice. Thanks, Nick. I think that's really good. And Doshia, what practical advice would you give students wanting to go into a career?
I would say invest in you. I was a long time Division I assistant for 19 years. And then this past year was my first opportunity to be a head coach, though I'd been trying. But that shifted when I started to invest in myself, not always waiting for your boss or someone to kind of tell you what's out there, to do your own research. If there's a conference or something that you want to be a part of or get involved in, I started to pay for different services out of my own pocket, just to kind of expand my network. A lot in the sports field, especially coaching, sometimes it's not necessarily what you know, but who you know, and really putting yourself in a position to interact and contact with more people. I'll also say I have a 5 o'clock, so I'm going to log off because I have a 5 o'clock Zoom as well. But I appreciate you guys let me be a part of this.
Yeah, I'll end it there. Thank y'all all very much. This has been great. The advice that you've shared with our students has been really invaluable, and I really appreciate it. Thank you, each and every one of you. And everybody have a great evening. Thank you very much.